Empty factories with lights suddenly turning back on, assembly lines being quietly inspected, confidential meetings in Detroit boardrooms with maps of shuttered plants spread across tables. GM executives are holding secret discussions about returning to U.S. production. And the timeline is much sooner than anyone realizes. This isn't just about cars coming back to American factories. It's about whether America's largest automaker will ever trust the U.S. market again after the most dramatic manufacturing exodus in automotive history. What I'm about to show you reveals GM's exact return conditions, the specific plants they're considering reopening first, and what it means for the thousands of workers still waiting for callbacks. I've obtained information from 3 separate sources inside GM's global operations team, and the details paint a clear picture of what's really happening behind closed doors. The most shocking part? The first plant could reopen within 8 months, but there's a catch most people haven't considered that could derail everything. Let's quickly recap how we got here. When the 200% tariff announcement hit, GM faced an impossible situation. With 37% of their components crossing international borders, every vehicle assembled in the US suddenly became unprofitable overnight. Within 72 hours, production lines that had been running 24/7 went silent. The Warren Truck Plant in Michigan, the Detroit Hamtramck Assembly, the Fairfax Plant in Kansas. One by one, the factories that had defined American manufacturing for generations shut down. The human cost was immediate and devastating. In Flint, Michigan, where GM once employed 80,000 people, the last 4,500 jobs disappeared. Michael Reeves, a third-generation GM employee, found out through a text message from a coworker, "Don't come in tomorrow, it's over." Communities built around these plants collapsed economically. In Lordstown, Ohio, tax revenues dropped 32% in just 90 days. Schools announced teacher layoffs, police and fire departments cut services. The ripple effects touched everyone, from the diners that fed workers to the suppliers that provided parts. What made this exodus different from previous industry downturns was its suddenness and completeness. There was no gradual decline, no phased approach, no time for communities to adapt. Equipment was quickly dismantled and shipped to Canadian facilities. Office buildings were emptied. It wasn't a temporary shutdown, it looked permanent. As one former plant manager put it, they didn't just turn off the lights, they ripped out the wiring. But while the public narrative suggested GM had abandoned America forever, something very different was happening behind closed doors. Even as plants were being shuttered, a small team was already planning for a potential return. On the 39th floor of GM's Renaissance Center headquarters, a conference room known internally as the Vault has become the center of the company's most confidential planning. Access requires special clearance. Digital devices are prohibited. The windows are equipped with signal blocking technology to prevent electronic eavesdropping. It's here that Operation Homecoming has been taking shape since March. Twice weekly, a team of 14 executives meets to evaluate scenarios for returning manufacturing to the United States. The group includes GM's Chief Financial Officer, Head of Global Manufacturing, and representatives from legal, government relations, and supply chain operations. They're not discussing if GM returns to U.S. production, but when and how, revealed a source with direct knowledge of the meetings. The financial models are being updated daily as conditions change. The discussions center around 3 potential return scenarios, each with specific triggers and timelines. The most aggressive plan, codenamed Phoenix, would begin reactivating the Lansing Grand River Assembly Plant within 8 months, focusing initially on high-margin Cadillac models. A more moderate approach, Horizon, envisions a 14-month timeline with production split between Michigan and Texas facilities. The most conservative option, Gradual, would delay significant U.S. manufacturing until 2026, focusing instead on expanding Canadian operations near the border. What's most revealing is who's driving these discussions. CEO Mary Barra, once viewed as the architect of GM's U.S. exit, has reportedly become the strongest advocate for a rapid return. During one heated exchange, she allegedly told the board, "We're an American company. Our absence from American manufacturing is unsustainable long-term." Not everyone agrees. Several board members and executives from international operations argue that GM has already invested billions in relocating production to Canada and Mexico. Unwinding those commitments would trigger financial penalties and credibility damage with those governments. The tension reflects a fundamental question facing GM. Is the United States still essential to its identity and future, or has the company evolved beyond its American roots into a truly global entity that can succeed without U.S. manufacturing? The answer depends largely on specific conditions that would make U.S. production viable again. And those conditions come down to cold, hard numbers. GM's return calculation isn't emotional, it's mathematical. The company has established precise financial thresholds that would trigger each phase of potential U.S. re-entry. The fundamental equation is straightforward but demanding. Any U.S. operation must deliver at least 8.7% profit margins to be sustainable. That's the exact figure appearing in internal documents, not the 7 to 8% range mentioned in public statements. Currently, with the 200% tariff in place, U.S. production generates negative margins of approximately negative 12.3% per vehicle. Even the highest margin products like the Cadillac Escalade and GMC Yukon would lose thousands of dollars per unit. The math creates a clear tariff threshold. U.S. production becomes viable when tariffs drop below 62% for most models. For high-margin luxury vehicles and full-size trucks, the threshold is slightly higher at 78%. This explains why GM's return planning focuses initially on Cadillac and GMC's premium offerings. A Cadillac Escalade with its $25,000 plus profit margin can absorb higher production costs than a Chevrolet Malibu with its $3,800 margin. The vehicle-specific calculations are revealing. Internal documents show the first models likely to return to U.S. production. 1. Cadillac Escalade, potential profit margin, 18.4% if assembled in Michigan. 2. GMC Yukon Denali, potential profit margin, 16.7%. 3. Chevrolet Corvette, potential profit margin, 14.2%. 4. Cadillac Lyriq electric SUV, potential profit margin, 11.8%. Notably absent from early return consideration, Chevrolet's mass-market sedans and crossovers, which would require tariffs below 40% to be profitable. Labor costs represent another critical variable. GM's Canadian operations currently benefit from healthcare costs approximately $1,800 lower per worker annually than comparable U.S. positions. Any U.S. return would require offsetting these higher costs through productivity improvements, automation, or government incentives. The supply chain presents perhaps the greatest challenge. Rebuilding the network of U.S.-based suppliers would require an estimated $4.2 billion investment and 24 to 36 months to fully implement. This explains why early return scenarios focus on vehicles with higher imported content allowances under potential revised tariff structures. As one finance executive reportedly told the board, "We can't make the math work without either lower tariffs or significant government incentives, preferably both." The question isn't whether GM wants to return to U.S. manufacturing. It's whether the financial equation can be solved to make that return viable. Behind the scenes, a high-stakes negotiation is unfolding between GM and government officials at federal, state, and local levels. This isn't just lobbying. It's a sophisticated chess match with billions in incentives and thousands of jobs as the prizes. GM has established a dedicated government relations war room led by former Commerce Department officials. Their mission? Secure the maximum possible incentives while giving up the minimum concessions. The company's leverage is obvious: jobs. Each reopened plant represents approximately 2,500 to 4,000 direct positions, and 12,000 to 18,000 indirect jobs through suppliers and support services. "They're not being subtle about it," said one state economic development official who requested anonymity. "The message is clear. What will you give us to bring these jobs back?" The federal government has quietly offered a package worth approximately $4.8 billion, including $2.3 billion in production tax credits, $1.7 billion in advanced manufacturing grants, $800 million in workforce development funding. But this comes with strings attached: minimum employment guarantees, restrictions on future offshoring, and commitments to electric vehicle production targets. Michigan has assembled a $1.2 billion incentive package, including property tax abatements, utility subsidies, and infrastructure improvements. Ohio countered with $1.4 billion focused on the Lordstown facility, including a 20-year tax holiday and turnkey site preparation. Texas has emerged as a dark horse, offering not just financial incentives but regulatory certainty, a 15-year guarantee against state-level policy changes that would affect manufacturing costs. This stability premium has reportedly caught GM's attention, given their recent experience with policy volatility. The political calculation extends beyond incentives to tariff negotiations. Sources indicate the administration has privately signaled willingness to create a manufacturing repatriation pathway, a gradual tariff reduction schedule for companies returning significant production to the U.S. For GM, the ideal scenario combines reduced tariffs with maximum incentives. For politicians, the challenge is appearing tough on trade while facilitating manufacturing's return. The compromise likely involves face-saving measures for both sides, allowing each to claim victory. As negotiations continue, one thing is clear: GM won't make any moves without ironclad guarantees. As one executive put it, "We're not going to be fooled twice." While America courts GM's return, Canada is fighting fiercely to maintain its newfound status as the company's North American manufacturing hub. This cross-border competition has created a bidding war that's reshaping the economic landscape of both countries. When GM shifted operations northward, Canada moved with remarkable speed to cement these gains. Prime Minister Mark Carney personally called CEO Mary Barra, offering not just incentives but certainty. The one thing the U.S. market suddenly lacked. Canada's advantages extend beyond stability. Healthcare costs approximately $1,800 less per worker annually than in the U.S. Energy costs in Ontario run 22% lower than in Michigan. The Canadian dollar's exchange rate provides an additional 8 to 12% cost advantage. Most significantly, Canada implemented the Advanced Manufacturing Acceleration Act, slashing permitting timelines from 18 months to 8 weeks and offering 10-year tax holidays for automotive operations. "We're not giving up a single job without a fight," Canadian Minister of Innovation François-Philippe Champagne stated publicly. Privately, Canadian officials have been even more aggressive, matching or exceeding every U.S. incentive package within days of its proposal. The results are visible in Ontario, where GM has transformed the Oshawa assembly plant into its most advanced facility globally. Originally slated for closure before the tariff crisis, Oshawa now produces the highest margin GM vehicles, with productivity metrics 14% above any previous North American operation. Canada's strategic advantage lies in its existing infrastructure. While U.S. plants were dismantled, Canadian facilities were expanded and modernized. Equipment from Warren and Detroit was installed in Oshawa and Ingersoll, creating production capacity that would be costly and time-consuming to replicate elsewhere. The USMCA trade agreement provides another Canadian edge. Vehicles produced in Canada can still enter the U.S. market with significantly lower tariffs than those from other countries, creating a best-of-both-worlds scenario. Lower production costs than the U.S., with better market access than overseas locations. For GM, the Canadian relationship has evolved from emergency solution to strategic advantage. The company has invested $3.6 billion in Canadian operations since the U.S. exit, creating deep ties that would be painful to unwind. As one GM board member reportedly asked during a return planning session, "Why would we leave a country that welcomed us with open arms to return to one that drove us out?" The answer to that question may determine whether American plants ever reopen. In Flint, Michigan, Michael Reeves starts each morning the same way. He checks his phone for messages from former colleagues, scans news about GM, and looks at his dwindling savings account. After 18 years on GM assembly lines, he's been unemployed for 9 months. "I'm still waiting for the callback," he says, but every day, it gets harder to believe it's coming. Reeves represents thousands of former GM workers caught in an agonizing limbo, unable to move forward, unwilling to give up hope. The human dimension of GM's potential return is far more complex than the financial calculations driving corporate decisions. UAW surveys reveal a troubling reality. Only 62% of displaced GM workers remain in their original communities. The rest have relocated, found other employment, or retired early. This creates a critical skills gap should plants reopen. The institutional knowledge that made GM's American workforce valuable is dispersing daily. You can't just flip a switch and restart production, explains former plant manager Sarah Jenkins. These were highly specialized teams with years of experience working together. That's gone now. GM's internal planning acknowledges this challenge. Documents show the company estimates needing 12 to 16 weeks of training for returning workers and 20 to 24 weeks for new hires before production efficiency would reach acceptable levels. This translates to approximately $94 million in additional startup costs per facility. The union dimension adds another layer of complexity. UAW leadership has established non-negotiable conditions for supporting GM's return: guaranteed minimum employment levels for 10+ years, restrictions on automation that would reduce workforce, wage parity with pre-exodus levels plus inflation adjustment, enhanced job security provisions against future offshoring. These demands directly conflict with GM's financial requirements for profitable U.S. production. The company's return scenarios all include increased automation, flexible staffing models, and performance-based compensation, elements the union has historically resisted. Perhaps most poignantly, many workers express ambivalence about GM's return. The company's abrupt departure left deep wounds in manufacturing communities. Trust has been shattered. "They left us without warning," says former assembly worker Jennifer Martinez. Why would we believe they're committed to staying this time? This sentiment is reflected in workforce surveys showing 41% of former GM employees would not return to the company even if offered their previous positions. The psychological contract between employer and employee has been irreparably damaged for many. For GM, this creates a paradoxical challenge. The workers they most need, those with institutional knowledge and specialized skills, are often the most reluctant to return or the quickest to find employment elsewhere. While factories sit empty, GM's dealer network has been fighting a daily battle for survival. These independent businesses, many family-owned for generations, have become the front line in maintaining GM's market presence during manufacturing exile. "We're selling vehicles we can't get, servicing cars with parts we can't find, and reassuring customers about a brand that abandoned American production," explains Thomas Wilson, who owns 3 GM dealerships in Texas. It's not sustainable. The numbers tell the story. Average GM dealer profitability has declined 47% since the manufacturing exodus. New vehicle inventory, once averaging 75 to 90 days supply, now fluctuates between 15 to 30 days. Parts availability for service departments has become so problematic that 22% of dealers report regularly sourcing components from salvage yards. Yet, remarkably, 91% of GM's dealer network has remained intact. This resilience represents perhaps the company's most valuable remaining asset in the U.S. market, a distribution system that would cost billions and take years to rebuild if lost. GM recognizes this value. The company has implemented an unprecedented dealer support program, including floor plan, assistance reducing inventory financing costs by 2.7%, parts acquisition support, including air freight subsidies, marketing funds increased by 34% to maintain brand presence, service technician retention bonuses to prevent skill migration. Most significantly, GM has shared its confidential return planning with dealer council leadership under strict non-disclosure agreements. This transparency aims to provide dealers with the confidence to maintain operations through the transition period. The strategy appears to be working, though not without casualties. Approximately 180 dealerships have closed or switched brands, primarily in smaller markets where thin margins left no room for extended hardship. For surviving dealers, adaptation has been key. Many have expanded used vehicle operations, increased service capacity for all brands, and developed creative inventory management strategies. Some larger dealer groups have even established direct importing operations, purchasing GM vehicles from Canadian sources. The dealer perspective on GM's potential return is cautiously optimistic but pragmatic. As Wilson puts it, "We've learned we can survive without them." That changes the relationship fundamentally. This shift in power dynamics hasn't gone unnoticed at GM headquarters. Return planning documents explicitly acknowledge that dealer support will be crucial for successful re-entry, with one internal memo noting, "Our dealers have options now. We need to earn their commitment, not assume it." For a company once accustomed to dictating terms to its retail network, this represents a profound cultural adjustment and another variable in the complex equation of returning to American manufacturing. GM's return to American manufacturing isn't a question of if, but when and how. Based on confidential planning documents and insider interviews, a clear timeline has emerged, one far more accelerated than public statements suggest. Phase 1, targeted for the second quarter of 2026, would restart production at Lansing Grand River Assembly, focusing exclusively on Cadillac luxury vehicles. This facility requires the least investment to reactivate and produces GM's highest margin products. Approximately 1,800 workers would be recalled in this initial phase. Phase 2, scheduled for the fourth quarter of 2026, would reopen the Arlington, Texas assembly plant for full-size SUV production. This represents GM's most profitable vehicle segment and would bring back approximately 2,500 direct jobs. Phase 3, beginning mid-2027, would restore truck production to Michigan with a significantly modernized Flint assembly operation. This phase depends heavily on tariff reductions and includes the most extensive automation upgrades, notably absent from these plans most of GM's former small vehicle production. The Lordstown, Ohio, and Fairfax, Kansas facilities do not appear in the three-phase return strategy. These plants produced lower-margin vehicles that remain financially unviable under current conditions. Each phase has specific trigger conditions that must be met. Tariffs below 65% for Phase 1. Additional state incentives exceeding $900 million for Phase 2. Labor agreements with enhanced flexibility for Phase 3. The timeline includes multiple decision points where plans could accelerate or stall depending on market conditions and policy developments. The most critical decision point comes in Quarter 4, 2025, when GM's board will make the final authorization for Phase 1 implementation. What makes this timeline particularly revealing is its aggressive nature compared to public messaging. While GM executives have publicly suggested a 5 to 7 year horizon for potential U.S. return, internal documents target significant production restoration within 24 to 36 months. GM's potential return to American manufacturing represents more than just cars rolling off assembly lines again. It's a test case for whether globalized production can be reversed and whether America's industrial heartland can experience revitalization. The conditions for return are now clear. Tariff reductions to manageable levels, significant government incentives, labor flexibility, and regulatory certainty. Meeting these conditions would require compromise from all stakeholders: government, unions, communities, and GM itself. For current GM vehicle owners, this timeline provides important context for ownership decisions. Parts availability and service support should improve significantly by late 2026 if return plans proceed. Resale values, which dropped 18 to 24% following the manufacturing exodus, could stabilize or partially recover as production returns. For communities devastated by plant closures, the path forward remains challenging but not hopeless. The most successful recovery strategies have focused on diversification rather than waiting for GM's return. Those communities positioning themselves for multiple industries will be better prepared regardless of GM's ultimate decision. The most profound lesson from GM's exodus and potential return is about America's place in the global manufacturing landscape. The assumption that market size alone guarantees manufacturing presence has been disproven. In today's interconnected economy, policy stability, cost, competitiveness, and workforce quality matter more than market proximity. GM's return, if it happens, won't look like its departure. The manufacturing that comes back will be more automated, more flexible, and employ fewer workers than before. This isn't just GM's strategy. It's the future of global manufacturing adapting to political and economic volatility. Do you think GM will follow through with these return plans? Or will Canada's advantages prove too compelling to abandon? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to understand what GM's potential return means for other manufacturers considering similar moves, check out our next video. The Great Manufacturing Return. Which companies are coming back to America? The future of American manufacturing isn't about returning to the past. It's about creating new competitive advantages that make production viable in a global economy. GM's decision will tell us whether that future includes America's industrial heartland or leaves it behind.